I don't think that maybe I should say any stories tonight, because this friend of ours here standing at the door, Red, has been making a couple of reels of his videos about these stories, of some of the stories of Baha'u'llah. Yes, of course you are also involved. But you know, I must first say to you, and I have always been saying, people often say, well, tell us stories. Now, stories of Baha'u'llah is not something which we should consider them as just mere stories. You know what I mean? You tell a story to children, you tell a story to people, and it becomes like a fairy tale things. It becomes a story, you know, how it is. Well, now this is far, far from it. Although you may call it stories of Baha'u'llah, but this is part of the history of our faith. And all these things that we attribute to him and whatever we talk about it are based on what his disciples had written and had left behind. The disciples of Baha'u'llah, many of them have described what they saw and what they felt in his presence. And each one, in accordance with his capacity, has written some of his impressions and experiences. There are many such accounts. And I have been saying again, over and over again, to various groups of people who are so fond of hearing the stories of Baha'u'llah, that please do not go and print them after having heard from me these stories, because you are bound to make some alterations. It's bound to be altered. It's bound to be changed. And it's not right that these stories go from ear to ear, from person to person, and at the end it will become so different from its reality, whatever it is, that these stories of Baha'u'llah have to be authentic from the original writings of those disciples who have written these stories, and that one should translate them. That's the best thing we can do. They have written it down, and the nearest to it is to translate them, and then you can read it. But to try to, of course I would try to give you the nearest to what I know of these accounts. But I'm sure if you go and say to your friends and describe it, and he tries to tell another friend, and then he tries to tell another friend, at the end you will find it will snowball so much, and it will become so different from the original form. I must say this, that unfortunately, to my view, now this is entirely my personal view, that we have done a lot of injustice to Abdul Baha by relating so many stories now published in various books in the West. I don't know the source of these things. Where are they? Was it a case that somebody said to somebody and somebody remembered it and somebody wrote it down eventually? In which case it really loses its authenticity. And sometimes you read the stories which are recorded in some English books, and to me it sounds as if Abdul Baha was from America, the way he talks. You know, whoever has written it with all good intentions, Abdul Baha said this and this, and really when you read it, it looks like as if he's come from Texas. I don't know. This is why I say we have probably done injustice. It's very important to be authentic in these matters. After all, these are the central figures of our faith, and anything we attribute to them, it must be authentic from the source. Well, now, having said this much, I want to mention one thing which is important and in fact we may not have the time to tell you the stories, but we will, maybe. I want to mention this, which is important, and that is that not until we recognize this fact can we appreciate Baha'u'llah and all the stories which are attributed to him. And it's this, that a manifestation of God, when he comes into this world, he hides his glory from man, from the generality of mankind. He does not come in his naked glory. And there is a reason for this. Baha'u'llah says that if he wanted it, he could, with the utterance of one word, subdue the hearts of all peoples in the world so that they all would recognize him and they all would be humbled before him. But he says to do that, it's against the law of creation. And I will explain to you why it is like this. You know, we have been given free will. God has given us the free will. Each one of us have the free will. And the free will is that you can go the right way or you can go the wrong way. And God will help you whichever way you choose to go. Although he throws light upon our path every now and again by sending his messengers, but the choice is up to us. And he never interferes in our actions. You do the wrong thing, you have to bear the consequences. And that's what we are doing. That's what mankind is going through right now. God does not want millions of peoples to be killed in wars. This is not God. God doesn't want that to happen. We attribute everything which goes wrong. We say, why should God do these things? God is not doing it. It's not God who wants millions of peoples to be killed. It's man who has gone such a way away from the teachings that it has bring upon itself this misery. It's man-made. This is only man's consequences of man's own actions. And God cannot and will not interfere, except that he sends his messengers and he relies on our free will to find him and recognize him in time. That's all. He will not interfere of all the wrongdoings that we do, and so because he has given us tremendous powers. You know, the power of life and death he has given to man. We have the power to build, we have the power to destroy, and he does not come and take it from us. And he says, okay, look here, you have killed so much, I'm now going to stop this. I'm going to interfere, and I'm going to make sure that nobody kills anybody else. This is not the way he will do it. He says, it's up to you. I'll give you an example of this. Do you remember some years ago, mothers who were pregnant, they took some drugs, and then all their children were born without limbs. You remember that? Thousands of children were born that way. Now God, and who are these children? They are the creation of God. It's God's creation. God cannot come down and say, look here, you have taken these drugs, and your children are going to be handicapped, but I'm going to stop them because it's my creation. I'm going to give them all. In spite of you take the drugs, it doesn't matter. I'll make sure that they all have their limbs and organs proper. Oh no, God doesn't do that. You have taken the drugs, this is the consequences. See, man has the free will in that way, freedom. We have enormous powers today. And so, because of this free will, when the manifestations of God appear, they can do two things, either of the two things. Either they can come in their naked glory, which means every eye will recognize them instantly, immediately, as soon as they come. All humanity will bow down before them and recognize this is his God. You see? God has come and he says, here I am, come all of you. Well, we all will lose our free will. Do you realize this? We all will become puppets of God then. The whole pattern of life will change. There will be no free will, because this is what will happen. Good and bad become the same. Everyone will recognize, here it is, I have come, all of us together, fine, that's finished. We all are there. We are all beautiful, humble before him, recognized him, live by his teachings. But it's all like a puppet show, you know, puppets. We become puppets of God. If he comes in his naked glory, this is what will happen. The other alternative is to hide that glory from the generality of mankind, so that those who have spiritual eyes will recognize him and then find him and follow him. In this way, his human temple becomes this mask, you can say. You can say he's wearing a mask. And the mask is his human side. You know, he comes to the world, he has to eat his food. If he doesn't eat the food, he is going to be, he's going to die. The manifestation of God will die if he does not eat his food. You see how this is a barrier? You see what the barrier there is for people? He has to sleep. If he doesn't sleep, he becomes like you and I, completely helpless. If you hurt him, he'll feel the pain. And then he also acts just like the rest of the people. He doesn't say, look, I'm a manifestation of God, like Christ wouldn't say 2,000 years ago, look here, people were living in these shabby little mud huts, dirty places, filthy places. He wouldn't say, look here, I am a manifestation of God, and I know in 2,000 years' time my people will make these beautiful sanitary facilities and beautiful, I want to have a wash every day, and I'm not going to live in these things. I'm going to live in a beautiful place myself 2,000 years ahead of you. Oh no, a manifestation of God. He lives just like the rest of the people in those shabby houses, and he is not probably washing himself just like the rest of the people for a long time. Really, if you ever saw Christ appearing in his real form today as it was 2,000 years ago, people will run away from him. Physically. This is how they were. You live exactly the way your people are living. And these become barriers. How can this be a messenger of God who has to eat, who has to sleep, who has to be like us, and who doesn't appear to know anything? Baha'u'llah often asked his followers, what is the news? What news have you got? Now, what would you say? Really? Now, we come to realize, therefore, that this is why they come in, they hide their glory. And they don't reveal it to the generality of mankind. And they submit themselves to their enemies. That's another thing. They never resist their enemies by their own powers. Baha'u'llah in so many of his tablets says, sometimes in a dramatic way, his pen, you know, the pen is the symbolic of the manifestation of God. The pen laments. And he says, why do you suffer so much? Let me move. Let me write one word through that power which is God has given to me, so that I can relieve you of all this suffering. And then the voice of God reaches him. You have no such right. You have to suffer. You have to go through this. You have to submit yourself to your enemies. You know, this is what happened. So you see, generality of mankind are blind to it. But those who recognize them, whoever recognized Baha'u'llah in his days, Baha'u'llah then, to his disciples, revealed to them a little bit of that glory, as if he opens up a little door, so that their faith may become complete, and they may become assured, and they may attain to the stage of certitude. You see? And this is where the story comes of all these disciples who come to him and who gives us all these wonderful stories of what they saw. In every one of them who went and attained his presence, he gave them such signs that was then sufficient for them to break it, to be sure, absolutely sure. You know, we all have faith, but faith has degrees. To have 100% faith and certitude is what we should aim for, 100%. And that is the faith of the martyr. 100% faith. And that is the faith that will never be shaken. And to give them that 100% faith, Baha'u'llah, to each one of his disciples, in accordance with their capacity, he unveiled a little bit of that glory. And this is where all the stories come. I wanted to mention that to you so that you can become clear about this. Well, I have said quite a lot of things in this tape which your friend has made here, and I may not repeat them tonight because then he will hear it twice. It's not fair. And I will dwell on maybe some other aspects of Baha'u'llah's life. I was talking in that tape about the majesty of Baha'u'llah, his majesty, and some of these stories. But now that I talked about this point, that Baha'u'llah always revealed something of his glory to his disciples, I will give you some stories of this, just two short ones, little ones. You know, there was one of the believers, his name is Taherzadeh Yazdi. He goes to the presence of Baha'u'llah, and when he goes there, he's so overwhelmed by the presence of Baha'u'llah when he first time went into his presence that he cannot express it. And quite frankly, nobody can express the joy and the excitement. And all of them have said that spiritually they could not. The spiritual experiences they could not explain. The only thing was that they were carried away into such spiritual worlds that they cannot describe it. This is what the presence of Baha'u'llah was like for them. And this man says when he went there, he was so carried away for a while. And then he thought to himself, and he said, I am in here, he had come from Ishqabad, and he said, I thought I should dedicate my pilgrimage and this joy of this pilgrimage and this privilege of pilgrimage to the memory of those people who are in Ishqabad, who are not here, and remain and attain the presence of Baha'u'llah on their behalf. And he said he particularly thought of 5 names in his mind. 5 people. And Baha'u'llah turned to him and he said, your intentions are very pure, your motive is right. It is tremendous, it's marvelous that you have been thinking of the friends in Ishqabad, and that our blessings will reach, be sure, to those 5 people. And he names every one of them one by one. One of them was Mirza Abul Fazl, that this man was thinking about. Well, Taherzadeh almost faints on the spot. He could not hold this any longer. I mean, this is the first striking of this great glory, you know. It's just like a tremendous confirmation of his faith. And he actually so much was on the point of fainting that Baha'u'llah recognized this, and he calls his servant. Baha'u'llah's servant was his secretary. You know, his secretary, his amanuensis, was also his servant. He calls him. Bring some sweetmeat for Taherzadeh, he said. And he brings a plate of sweetmeats, and Baha'u'llah gives him 1 piece, and then he says, Fi amanillah, means he was dismissed to go, he should go now. And this man falls in the stairs, he couldn't hold himself. And they go down and they help him and they bring him out and they nurse him. Now, you see, this is one of the things which we must remember. That is how, now this man was finished. This was finished for him. And this was only one example of this faith which Baha'u'llah confirmed in him. One example of it. Every one of the disciples have said this. Hello, this is the members of the NSA coming here now. Welcome indeed. And now you're coming to hear stories. Unfortunately, they're asking me to tell them stories of Baha'u'llah. Well, I must also tell you this, although I am very reluctant to say anything which would reflect on me. But it's nothing to do with me. It's my father, who was one of the disciples of Baha'u'llah who attained his presence in Akka. And whenever they asked him to tell us what Baha'u'llah was like, tell us what was he like, he would always recite a Persian poem for them in answer to that. And he says, this is your answer. And the Persian poem is Man gonge khab dide wa alam tamam kar, man aujazam ze guftan wa khalq az shanidanash. This is Baha'u'llah. Here we are. You understood it, didn't you? No, it means I am a dumb person. A dumb, a person who can't speak. I am a dumb person who has had a wonderful dream. And the rest of the people are all deaf. I am unable to say it, and people are unable to hear it. Now, this is Baha'u'llah. This is the impressions of Baha'u'llah. This is why you will find that every one of those disciples who had come in the presence of Baha'u'llah all of them have said that they could not describe him because they could not fully look into the face of Baha'u'llah. Now, I don't know whether I should say the story, which is already recorded in this tape, but I will tell you again, doesn't matter. I'm sure Red doesn't mind me to say that. Where is he? He's not here anyhow. Oh, good. Well, then I can say it.
I don't.
You don't mind. In the old days, early days of the faith, the Babis, the followers of the Bab, and the followers of Baha'u'llah were not separated. And the followers of the Bab, by followers of the Bab, I mean those people who followed Mirza Yahya. They were not separated from Baha'is. They used to mix together in gatherings. Some of them, and of course, as you know, the majority of the Babis became recognized Baha'u'llah, the majority of them. One of the eminent Baha'is of the time, he estimates that 99% of the Babis, of the followers of the Bab, recognized Baha'u'llah. But in the early stages, these Babis and Baha'is used to mix together. And there was a gathering, and in that gathering there was a man, a very eminent disciple of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, both, because he was a Babi first, and now he had been one of the very outstanding Baha'is. His name was Haji Sayyid Jawad. He was a very respected divine of Islam who as soon as he heard of the message that it has come from Shiraz, as soon as he heard that this message has been born in Shiraz, he said it must be the Bab, because he had seen him from childhood. And he immediately recognized him, Haji Sayyid Jawad. As soon as he heard, inadvertently he heard, because I don't want to go into this, maybe I tell you the story of it, doesn't matter now. Let me tell you this. When the Bab first declared his mission to these letters of the living, and when he sent them around, at first he sent one of them to Karbala, Mullah Ali. He went to Karbala and he told him that he should not disclose the identity of the Bab. All he had to do was to tell him that the Bab had appeared, but not to say who was the Bab, because he wanted to announce this in Mecca on pilgrimage. This was one of the traditions of Islam, and that his name should not be revealed. Well, this man goes to Karbala, and Haji Sayyid Jawad, and he mentions to the divines, and the divines of Karbala become very excited about this. Who is this person? And he can't tell them, he says. Now this man invites him to his home. This Haji Sayyid Jawad invites this emissary of the Bab to his home. And he says, tell me, who is it? And he says, I'm not allowed to tell you who it is. He comes along and he forces him. He practically gets hold of his clothes and he pushes him to the wall and he says, you must tell me. He said, I can't tell you. He says, tell me, where did you come from? He said, I came from Shiraz. Immediately, Haji Sayyid Jawad tells him, is it not Sayyid Ali Muhammad, the Bab, that we call him the Bab? He says, you said it. I am not supposed to say it. Now, that is how he recognized him right away. Because he had seen him from childhood. He said, no one else can be but him. Now this was the caliber of this man, and a very, very distinguished believer. And as soon as he met Baha'u'llah, he recognized him as him whom God shall make manifest. So he was a very outstanding believer to both. And as in this gathering, there were both Babis and Baha'is together. One of the Babis, one of the followers of Mirza Yahya, asked Haji Sayyid Jawad to tell him what the Bab was like. Tell us about the Bab, he said. Haji Sayyid Jawad said to him, well, when I met the Bab, it reminded me of the radiance and the beauty of Joseph. You know Joseph the prophet, who was sold in slavery in Egypt. It's the tradition of Islam that one of the characteristics of the promised one of Islam is that he will have the radiance of Joseph, the beauty of Joseph. The beauty of Joseph, Joseph is well known for his beauty in the Islamic traditions. He said, when I saw the Bab, the beauty, I saw the beauty of Joseph, and it became clear to me what it meant when it says in the traditions, the beauty of Joseph, the tenderness, the beauty, the youthfulness. Now you know how beautiful Joseph has been. You know how beautiful he was? Have you heard the story of him? In Islam again, there's a great deal about the beauty of Joseph. I can tell you a story which might be interesting to you. They say that when this woman in Egypt, who was the mistress of this house, bought Joseph as a slave. You know, he was sold as a slave, as you know, in Egypt by his brothers. And this woman fell in love with Joseph. And all the women in the town began to talk about it. This is terrible, that such a lady should fall in love with a slave. So she said, all right. She invited all the women, or not all, but some women of the town to her house. She said, you come there, I will show you Joseph. Now you see, Joseph, of course, we know this is the station of prophethood. You know, this is something which is very outstanding. The radiance, the powers that God had given to him naturally. That was most important. There are several stories. I won't tell them all. I won't tell you all of it, but I'll just tell you this one. When these women came to their house to see Joseph, he said, all right. She gave to each woman an orange. I don't know if you have heard that story or not. An orange. And she said, hold it in your left hand. And so all these women held this orange in their left hand. I suppose they were all right-handed. And then she gave to each one a very sharp knife. And she said, hold it in your right hand. She said, then I will open the door and Joseph comes in. As soon as he comes in, as soon as you see him, I want you to cut this orange into two. And as soon as they saw him, they all cut their hands. You see, this is a tradition in Islam. It's mentioned in the Quran. And this is so well known. In fact, the cutting of the hand by the Egyptians is one of those points which Nabil in one of his poems refers to. One night he said he was one night in Baghdad before Baha'u'llah's declaration was made. You know, before Baha'u'llah's declaration was made was a very, very special period, very beautiful period. You can imagine Baha'u'llah has not said who he was openly, although who would doubt it? All those companions who had been circling around him like moths which circle around the candle. Every one of those disciples of Baha'u'llah or his companions then in those days were so intoxicated with the wine of his presence in Baghdad. And Baghdad was a period of freedom for Baha'u'llah. It was a period that he walked in the city, that he went to the bazaars, that every day in the evenings he would go in the afternoons to this inn, in this kind of a coffee inn, And all the disciples of the Bab and his companions would go there with him. And they would all sit there and for half an hour, and Baha'u'llah would talk to them. And then they would come back home into his house. They often assembled in the evenings in the outer apartment of his house, which was his reception room, and how Baha'u'llah sometimes would come out himself and serve them tea with his own hands. It was a very special period. And often other people would come into his presence, sometimes dignitaries, sometimes princes of the Persian realm, sometimes the beggars, the poor, the rich. They all came into this outside house, outside reception room of Baha'u'llah. And it was a very, very special period. And the believers, and then as it came nearer to the time of his declaration, a few months before his declaration, the signs became so clear to them that something was in the air. They were all longing for the time that Baha'u'llah would come out and really declare himself as him whom God shall make manifest, because he had said everything except this one. He had said everything in all his writings. You can see the writings of Baha'u'llah. He identifies himself with God. You can see that. You read the hidden words, you read all the tablets. It's the voice of God talking to man. So many tablets of Baha'u'llah during that period of Baghdad was revealed, in which Baha'u'llah identifies himself unmistakably with the Almighty God. When he says, we sent Moses and we sent Jesus and we sent Muhammad, and in many of his tablets, so that it was not any doubt for the believers who he was, but they all were looking for a day that they could be And a few months before this, it became clear to them that something is happening, something is coming, because of the manner of his talks, the manner of his remarks, the remarks he made to them was so close. It's just like a woman who is going to give birth to a child, just like that. And that it's coming near enough. And everybody who knows and watches knows the time is coming. And Nabil mentions one night, he says, one night particularly sticks out in his mind, and he says that night nobody could sleep. He said we all were sitting in this room, and suddenly Baha'u'llah walked in with a little container carrying rose water, and he gave rose water to each one of them, and how with his own hands he anointed them. And he said the way he walked in and the way he made the remarks to them was so outstanding that it has been in his memory one of the most memorable evenings he had spent in the presence of Baha'u'llah. He said we became all intoxicated to such an extent that we couldn't help but to, with all the dignity that these men had in those days, you know, they all could not stop there but to even dance there, you know, dance of joy. And Nabil that night, he says, I wrote a little poem. And in that poem, he describes the greatness of that night, that he saw the King of Kings, the King of Kings. And he says, and then in this poem, I just wanted to tell you this particular point. That's all the reason I was telling you this little part in his poem. He says, he begins to rebuke his own person. He says, what a low person you are, he says to himself. How low can you get? He said those Egyptians saw a slave and they cut their hands. You, shame on you, he says. You saw a king and you didn't sacrifice your life for him. You know, you see the similarity of the 2 points? Those Egyptians saw a slave and they cut their hands. Shame on you. You saw a king and you did not offer up your life for him. Now this is the feeling of the early believers who were in the presence of Baha'u'llah. And that is why Nabil says that we could not remember our names. In fact, many people have said this who have been. Haji Mirza Haydar Ali, this great believer, he says when Baha'u'llah went to the house of Abud, you all have heard of or seen the house of Abud, when he was able to walk on the balcony in the afternoons. He says all those people who were the companions of Baha'u'llah, and every one of them had by then a profession, a work in the town, they were doing something. They would stop working at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and coming along near the house of Abud, in front of the house, somewhere they would be all sitting in 2s and 3s and 5s from 3 o'clock waiting for the time that Baha'u'llah would come out and stand on the balcony to get some fresh air and to see the sea. Hoping and wanting and longing for the time that he would summon one of them or two of them. And he says as soon as one person was summoned, that person would be so excited that he would forget his name, his personality, everything. He would run with such speed into the house with such a speed that no one can remember. He could not remember anything, what happened, how, and rejoicing that the rest were waiting for him to come back. And when he came back, he said he was not in a position to talk. He couldn't talk for a long time. And even when he talked, he couldn't express himself. He couldn't say what had happened, what was there. Now this is the condition of the believers in those days. They were lovers, they were intoxicated, they had seen their God. There was no doubt about it, because Baha'u'llah had, in fact, fully given to them signs that he was their God, really. He was their... My father would say, every time I wanted to ask something from Baha'u'llah, I would think of it in my heart. Now what else do you want? I would think of it in my heart, and in the course of as he was talking, he would turn to me, he would look at me, and he would answer me, and then he would continue with his talks all the time. He says very seldom he had the reason to talk to him. You see, this is how, now this person's faith becomes 100%. Now he can go and give his life is nothing at all. This is how these spiritual giants were made. They became magnets. Each one of them became magnets. If you bring a piece of iron in front of a magnet, that piece of iron become magnet. It's no longer a piece of iron. Anyhow, I'll take you back to that story which we were talking about. You remember I was telling you some of these Babis were sitting there and they asked Haji Sayyid Jawad, what was the Bab like? And he said, oh, when I saw his face, the radiance and the power was that I know now what it says when they say he has to have the radiance of Joseph, the beauty of Joseph. Now because this question was asked by one of the Babis, was one of those people who was not a follower of Baha'u'llah. One of the followers of Baha'u'llah in that gathering decided that this is not good, because people will think that Haji Sayyid Jawad hasn't gone further than the Bab, that he is also one of the followers of the Bab and not of Baha'u'llah. So this Baha'i this time asked Haji Sayyid Jawad, tell us about Baha'u'llah. What about the face of Baha'u'llah? What was he like? And this is what he answers. He says, if anybody tells you whether he is a friend or whether he is an enemy, if anybody tells you whether he is a friend or whether he is an enemy, that he has been able fully to look into the face of Baha'u'llah and fully look into his face, be sure he's lying. Because he said it was impossible. He says, in the first place, when you were in his presence, you were so carried away. You were not in this world, that you could not see anything. You could not feel anything. Could not see anything. And if you were conscious, if you were looking into his eyes, it was just like looking into the sun. You had to put your head down, and then water would come into your eyes. You had to put your head down. He says, this is Baha'u'llah. This Another believer, many believers have said the same thing. One of the believers, Haji Mirza Haidar Ali, he says that for 7 months, he said, I was in Adrianople. And he says every day, sometime once and sometime twice, I would attain the presence of Baha'u'llah. And then he said, when anybody came out of his presence, he mentions that. Anybody who came out of the presence of Baha'u'llah, he said it would take him some time to adjust himself back to normal. And that would take some time. And this time, he says, differed from person to person. But eventually, you would come down. And he mentions, by the way, he says there was one man who never came back to his normal case, to his normal form. He stayed in the state of ecstasy, supreme ecstasy, until he gave his life. And that was Badi, he said, the young Badi who took the tablet of Baha'u'llah to the king. He said he never left that state of ecstasy and joy and upliftment that he was there. Now, Haji Mirza Haidar Ali says, for 7 months I was in the presence of Baha'u'llah in Adrianople, and every day, once or twice, I would attain his presence. And when I came out, he said, I was wanting to know what was the color or the shape of the headdress of Baha'u'llah, because in those days, headdress was a very important part of a man's clothing. People would never come out bareheaded. It was very impolite. This is why you see Abdul Baha always have a headdress. Shoghi Effendi had a headdress. And he said he wanted to know the color and the shape of it, but he couldn't. For 7 months, he was there, and every day he wanted to see it, and he said, every time I went there, I was so carried away. And this man eventually is sent to the Sudan as a prisoner because of the faith. For 10 years he was in prison. In the meantime, Baha'u'llah goes to Akka, and when he is released from Sudan, he goes straight to Akka. And he says, again, I had not seen the color of the headdress of Baha'u'llah after all these years, the second time that he went and visited him in Akka. Until one day, he says, we went into the garden of Rizwan. There is a little garden there, you know that, garden of Rizwan. And there is a little room there where Baha'u'llah often rested. And he stayed there, and sometimes he ate there, and sometimes he wrote some of his tablets there. And he said the room was full of people. And some were standing outside on the little steps. And he said, I went along, and there was no room. I stood outside. And the only thing he said I could do was to peep through the window. You know? And he said, when I peeped through the window, the only thing I could see was only the headdress of Baha'u'llah. And then he records the color and the shape. Now you see, this is the impressions of the early believers. To look into the face of Baha'u'llah is something that all the believers have said. Every one of these disciples who have said anything about the face of Baha'u'llah, this is what they have said. They said we could not look into his eyes. And one of the believers says that when Baha'u'llah spoke to us, he often closed his eyes. And, or sometimes his head was turned another way, knowing of this power which they couldn't stand it. My father was telling us a story. He said that one day he always wanted to look properly to the face. Now, of course, they would see the face, but to look into someone's eyes is different, and see properly is different. He said one day he always wanted to look into the face of Baha'u'llah, but one day he arrived, and when he arrived, often this was the custom of Baha'u'llah. He would say, he would welcome the person in, and he would be seated, and there may be other believers there as well, and he would sit down, and he would immediately ask his servant to bring tea for him. This was customary, bring tea for him. Well, he said he gave me the cup of tea in my hand, and he said, I don't know what happened, that as soon as he put the cup of tea in my hands with a saucer, saucer, he said, suddenly my eyes fell on the eyes of Baha'u'llah, and I couldn't take it away. Well, he almost fainted. He couldn't hold himself. The cup fell from his hand, and it burnt him, and he didn't realize this until Baha'u'llah suddenly turned to him and he said, look what you have done. Look what you have done to your clothes. You have burnt yourself. And then he said, I realized. Now then, something else happened. Now, all right, we're telling you these stories. Let me say this to you. On this journey, when he was sitting there and this tea poured on his clothes, in those days the Persians used to have a cloak. Everybody used to wear a cloak. You know, you have seen Abdul Baha, he's also wearing a cloak. And this cloak could be either a summer one or a winter one. And in the summer you would wear a thin, very thin cloak which was made of silk. And he was the summertime and he was wearing the silken clothes. When the tea poured on it and Baha'u'llah said, look what you have done to your clothes, look you have burnt yourself. He said, protect this abba, this cloak. This is going to be your only clothes back to Persia when you're going home. And then he said, we in the mountains of Sulaymaniyah also had only one change of linen. Now this was a story which was current amongst the believers. And in fact, Shoghi Effendi mentions that in God Passes By, that Baha'u'llah, when he went into these cold, cold mountains of Kurdistan, he took with him only one change of linen. Linen is very cold, it's like summer clothes. So he confirmed this. And my father did not know what it meant, all this. Protect this Abba. And also he said, we also in the mountains of Sulaymaniyah did not have more than one change of linen. Clothes. Well, I can tell you that when they were leaving Akka, and there are so many stories there which I won't tell you now, but when they were leaving Akka, Baha'u'llah entrusted, he and Sheikh Salman were together, traveling together. Sheikh Salman was the man who used to carry, he was the messenger of Baha'u'llah. He used to carry the tablets of Baha'u'llah backwards and forwards to the friends in Persia. Every year he would make journeys backwards and forwards. And both of them were to travel together. On that journey, Baha'u'llah told Sheikh Salman, he said, it's not wise that you carry the tablets with you. It's not safe. He said, you go to Persia, we send the tablets to you. Now, the number of tablets would be quite a number. Quite a number of tablets, not one or two. It was in those days very important for the carrying of all these tablets. It was something you couldn't do it in the post. All these tablets of Baha'u'llah were sent to Persia by the disciples, mostly by Sheikh Salman and other disciples. And it was a very difficult job to protect it, because in most borders, when you arrived, even between towns, even when you went in the same country, you went from one town to another, they would search you if you were a passenger. If you were going in a caravan, which they often did, then they would stop the caravans when you went from one town to another to search you. And if they found anything which belonged to the faith, then that would be the end of you and the tablets and all. And so this needed a great deal of wisdom. And I'm not telling you how they handled it, but that's a different story. Now, that journey, Baha'u'llah said to Sheikh Salman, he said, go to Mecca. He said, go via Mecca, and but it's not wise, it's not safe that you carry the tablets. So my father and Sheikh Salman, both of them, went to Mecca. They went to a place called Jeddah, and they stayed for the night. They got a little room in the town, in these caravansarais. There are a lot of inns and caravansarais, and they went there and they put their luggage, which was in the form of bags, on in front of a window, which had no glass in it or anything. It was just a window with some iron bars open. And they went and they slept inside. When they got up in the morning, they found out that the thief had come at night with a knife, cut the bag, and taken everything they had. Everything. Oh, the Sheikh Salman realized now what has happened. And he said to my father, he said, you know, Baha'u'llah cares for his tablets, but not about our things. You know, about our things, it doesn't matter. So, now they had nothing. Now in those days, men did not have something like, men usually used to sleep and women also, they slept in their ordinary clothes. It was not something like a pajamas that you had to change. Men usually slept in their shirts and in their ordinary clothes. And so when they got up in the morning, all they had to do was to just walk out to see if they can find a thief. And there is no police proper who could look after these things for you. You'll have to do it yourself. Then suddenly my father remembered that the Abba, this cloak, had also gone. This cloak which was, and Baha'u'llah had said, protected, this is your only clothes back to Persia. He said to Nabil, oh, we will find this thief. We're bound to find him because of this that Baha'u'llah has said, and he has taken the cloak. There, it's gone. And they began to search after a day or two in the streets and in the bazaars of Jeddah. And then they suddenly spotted a man who was wearing that same cloak that belonged to my father. So that's how they caught the thief. And my father went in and he took the cloak from him and put it on himself. They took him to the police station, and the police investigated, and he said he has no money, he has sold it all. We can't get anything out of him. We can put him in prison, but you have to pay the expenses for him if you want to put us into prison. When they said, no, we don't want to put him in prison. So then they managed to get some money from the agents there and some agents, and they managed to get back, but decided they go by ship to Bombay, to India. And he said, the only clothes I had was this Abba, this cloak, summer cloak. And at night it would get so cold on the deck of the ship that there was no ships like now that you can stay in cabins. They had to sleep on the deck. He said, I was shivering all night, remembering the words of Baha'u'llah that he said, we also in Sulaymaniyah had one change of linen. And this indicated to him that now he knew the sufferings of Baha'u'llah and his hardships. And this is why he said this to him. You see now how things will move from one point to another. And so these believers were all of them like this, filled with this power of faith. This is why I was saying that those who attained his presence, they could not really look into that face, look into those eyes. And that is why all of the disciples of Baha'u'llah who have written their account of Baha'u'llah, all of them are silent on the question of what he looked like. Nobody has written a pen portrait of Baha'u'llah amongst these disciples. Nobody has. Nobody has said what he looked like. And as I said, I told you what my father would say when they asked him, tell us what he looked like. And he said, I am a dumb person who has had a wonderful dream. That was his answer. The only person who has left behind a pen portrait is a non-Baha'i. And that is Professor Edward Brown of Cambridge. And you know what he has written. You know the story of him. How he went to the mansion of Bahji. Very exceptionally, Baha'u'llah gave him this interview, this audience. He allowed him to come in for this audience with him. And he describes it in very glowing terms of his impressions then of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. You should read it for yourself. He speaks of this, he gives the impressions of Abdul Baha there, and also marvelous. And then he comes to Baha'u'llah. He says, I entered the room and I thought there was nobody sitting there. And then suddenly he said, I became aware with the throb of awe and wonder when I saw in the corner a person with a luxurious, I cannot describe his words, you should read it. But one thing I remember almost his words when he tries to describe Baha'u'llah. He says, the face of him on whom I gazed, this is almost his words, the face of him on whom I gazed, I can never forget. See, I can never forget, though I cannot describe it. Now that's a good statement. I cannot forget, but I cannot describe it. Then he talks about, he says, those piercing eyes. You see, again, he talks about the eyes here. It's very significant for a person like Brown, who was two-sided, you know, for him to say this. Those piercing eyes used to read one's very soul. And here we are. He talks about power and authority, which sat on that ample brow. And he talks about his majesty, which the kings would envy, and the emperors sigh for in vain. The majesty that the kings would envy, and the emperors sigh for in vain. I told you the other day the impressions of one of the believers. What went into his mind and heart when he saw the majesty of Baha'u'llah, and he said he wished the kings were there. You remember that? Those of you who were here, I told you the story of it. The majesty of Baha'u'llah was such that everyone who recognized him, everyone who saw him, they saw the majesty, although they did not see his glory, as I said, to the generality of mankind. But when they came face to face with him, they could see that this is not an ordinary person. The majesty was there. Even the guards who were protecting Baha'u'llah, within a few days' time, when they came in contact with him, when they came in real contact with him in Akka, they realized that this is not a person that they can deal with like ordinary prisoners. And it was then that, the guard, the head of the guards, the officer in charge of the barracks, he saw the greatness and the majesty. And later on, he became a great admirer and eventually a believer. In those days, nobody would teach the faith. And even now, we don't teach the faith in the Holy Land. Baha'u'llah had forbidden it, had forbidden his followers to teach the faith to anywhere in the Ottoman Empire. He said teach the faith in Persia and in Iraq and other places, or in Persia, but not in those parts. This was for the protection of the faith. Nobody taught the faith to these men, but several people recognized Baha'u'llah by their own powers, by their own qualities. One of them was this officer. And this officer, what really made it a final thing for him that he couldn't hold it anymore, was when he came with his brother, this officer and his brother, came to the presence of Baha'u'llah. His brother he had two brothers. One of them was the head of the municipality of Akka, and one of them was a doctor, a physician. He came with one of them to the presence of Baha'u'llah to complain about his boss, about his officer in charge, who was his superior. They used to come to Baha'u'llah for everything, those days. All the governors and people, they wanted to come to him. He wouldn't let them in. He would not meet with them. But this was a time that Baha'u'llah, this man, this officer Baha'u'llah was in his charge. He could not to see him. And he came to Baha'u'llah with his brother to complain about all the cruelties that his superior officer was making for him. The name of the superior officer was Aghasi. When he arrived, as soon as he arrived in the presence of Baha'u'llah, and he showed his respects to Baha'u'llah, and his brother were ushered in, and they sat. He showed them seats to sit down. Baha'u'llah turned to him and to his brother, and he said, "Praise be to God, that God relieved you from all these cruelties of Aghasi, the superior officer." He was astonished at this statement, and he was dumbfounded. He didn't know what to say. He just didn't say anything more. And when he went outside, he went to Abdul Baha and he said to Abdul Baha, what does this mean? I've just come in to complain about all these problems that's going on and pour out my heart, and Baha'u'llah said, praise be to God that he has relieved you of this man. Abdul Baha said, if Baha'u'llah has said, he has relieved you. Well, he goes back to his office and he found a telegram has just arrived from Beirut dismissing this officer. You see? Now he comes to the presence of Baha'u'llah and he prostrates himself at his feet. And that was the end for him. And those of you who have been into the mansion of Mazra', you have seen the picture of this officer with his sword hanging down, Jarrah, and all his family now are believers, devoted, steadfast believers, pioneers in different parts of the world. You see now? I will tell you some stories of I'm just trying to kill time for you. It's another half an hour left. You know that in those days that Baha'u'llah went into the prison of Akka, there was a man, I'm sure you have all heard the story of Sheikh Mahmoud. It's nothing new to you. Many of you have heard the story. This is a well-known story, but I'll tell you. This Mahmoud, Sheikh Mahmoud, when he was a little boy, about 10 years of age, in Akka, his father was part of a group of people, religious people, who had a circle, and they used to meet once in a while. And when they met one day, their religious leader said to them that he had a vision, and he wanted to tell them this vision. And he said the vision was that he knows that the promised one of Islam had come and had just been executed in Persia. That is the Bab. And he said, now is the time of the coming of the great one. That is of Baha'u'llah.
Would this take place?
In Akka. In Akka. And he said, now is the time of the coming of the great one. And he said, he will come to this town, to Akka. And he will live in a high place. And he unveiled this vision before all this congregation of his friends. They're all old people. And then he looked around and he saw two young fellows. One of them was Mahmoud and another man. They were about 10 years old. He called Sheikh Mahmoud to himself. He called this Mahmoud to himself. He said, you come here. And then he took a piece of sand, or a grain of sand, or a little sharp object, and he put it beside his ear, in the lobe of his ear here, and he squeezed it hard until blood came out of it. And he said, do you know why I did this? He said, so that you will not forget today when you grow up, because all of us would be gone, would be dead at the time that the manifestation of God will come here. Let us put it this way. We were all gone, but I want you to remember, and I want you too to go and see him, believe in him, and convey to him our faith also. And he told him that he must never forget this day. Well, this Mahmoud grew up, and when Baha'u'llah came, he was a grown-up man.